I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would tell a story like this, but here I am, writing it all out because keeping it inside feels heavier than I can bear. And before I begin, let me make it clear. The names I'm using here are not real, because if I revealed the actual ones, people could easily find me on Instagram or other social media and send me abuse. I'm a wife, a mother of two beautiful kids, and on the outside, I had what most people would consider a perfect life. My husband, Mark, is a professional cricketer. He's not just good, he's famous, the kind of athlete who has his name shouted by thousands of people in stadiums and plastered on sports channels. We had the big house, the fancy cars, the financial security that most couples only dream of. People around us used to call us the golden family. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that money and status don't always translate into happiness. Don't get me wrong, I loved Mark. I still do in my own complicated way. He's a good man and an even better father when he's around. But that's the catch, he was hardly around. His life was airports, stadiums, hotel rooms, endless training sessions, and tournaments. When he was home, he was exhausted, his body sore, his mind focused on the next match. And when he wasn't home, I was left managing the house, the kids, and the long, lonely nights. The loneliness crept in slowly. At first, I busied myself with the children, with hobbies, with whatever I could do to fill the time. But after years of this cycle, something in me began to ache in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. I felt unseen, untouched, and undesired. Our intimacy dwindled until it was almost non-existent, and though I tried to talk to him about it, he always promised, after the season, things will calm down. We'll have more time. But that season never ended. Then came Anderson. He was new to the national team, a tall, broad-shouldered man with striking blue eyes and an easy smile that could make anyone feel like the only person in the room. I remember the first time Mark brought him home. It was one of those off days when the team had practice in the morning and then hung out afterward. Mark wanted me to meet him because Anderson had just moved to the city and didn't know many people. The moment I shook his hand, I felt something. Maybe it was the way his hand lingered just a second longer than necessary, or the way his eyes held mine with a spark I hadn't felt in years. I brushed it off, told myself I was imagining things, but deep down I knew I wasn't. Anderson started coming over often. Sometimes with Mark, sometimes with other teammates, and eventually even on his own when Mark invited him for team meetings or casual hangouts. He was polite, charming, the kind of man who knew how to make everyone comfortable. But when his eyes met mine, there was always an unspoken tension, like we both knew there was something dangerous brewing beneath the surface. One evening, everything changed. Mark had invited Anderson over to talk about some team strategy before their upcoming series. They were both sitting in the living room with their laptops out, laughing and analyzing match clips. After a while, Mark got a call from the manager asking him to step out and pick up some documents from a nearby office. It wasn't supposed to take long, so Anderson stayed behind to finish going over some notes on his laptop. That was when temptation finally won. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the wine I had been sipping earlier. Maybe it was the months, years, of unmet needs piling up inside me. I went upstairs, slipped into a short silk dress I usually reserved for special nights with Mark, and came back down. The fabric clung to me, the neckline low enough that it left little to the imagination. My heart pounded in my chest as I walked into the room, pretending like it was nothing, pretending like I wasn't about to do something reckless. Anderson's eyes widened slightly when he saw me. He closed his laptop slowly, his gaze drifting over me in a way that sent a shiver down my spine. "You look incredible," he said softly, his voice husky. I should have walked away. I should have laughed it off, made some excuse, and gone back upstairs to change. But instead, I took a step closer, then another, until I was standing right in front of him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. When his hand brushed against mine, every ounce of self-control I had left shattered. He pulled me closer, and before I knew it, his lips were on mine. The kiss was hungry, desperate, the kind that comes from holding back for too long. My knees nearly gave out when his hand slid over my waist, pulling me tighter against him. We didn't stop there. The living room, the couch, It became the scene of something I had fantasized about but never thought I'd actually do. The rush of adrenaline, the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, the way his hands explored every inch of me, it was overwhelming. For those stolen moments, I wasn't the neglected wife of a famous athlete. I was a woman who was seen, wanted, craved. It happened twice that evening. Twice before Mark even returned home. By the time I slipped back upstairs to fix myself up, I barely recognized the person staring back at me in the mirror. And it didn't stop there. From that day forward, Anderson always seemed to find a reason to come around. Sometimes he showed up with Mark, sometimes he dropped by alone. At times he pretended it was about cricket, watching old match footage, discussing practice schedules, or he'd casually say he was just in the neighborhood. But underneath those excuses, we both knew the truth. What had started that first night didn't end. If anything, it only grew stronger. The tension between us became an addiction neither of us could resist. Days blurred into weeks, and before I even realized it, 3 full months had passed. Anderson had quietly woven himself into my life. We met in stolen moments at my house when Mark wasn't there, in hotels when the team traveled, and even in places far too risky for comfort. Each encounter pulled me deeper, making it harder to stop, even though I knew I was playing with fire. And then, one morning, my entire world shifted. I had missed my period. At first, I dismissed it, stress, hormones, anything but the obvious. But when the second month passed, I bought a test. The little stick confirmed what I had been dreading. I was pregnant. I stood in the bathroom staring at the test in my shaking hands, my heart racing. My husband had barely touched me in months. Deep down, I knew the truth. The baby growing inside me wasn't his. It was Anderson's. Panic consumed me. How could I possibly explain this? Mark would never forgive me. Our entire life, our family, our so-called golden image would shatter into pieces. I considered telling Anderson, but I couldn't even bring myself to say the words. He was focused on his career, and by then he was thriving. In just 3 months, he had gone from being the new guy on the team to one of the rising stars. His name was in the papers, commentators praised his performance, and fans adore him. Meanwhile, Mark's career was slipping. He wasn't getting the same opportunities anymore. Younger players were stepping into the spotlight, and his time on the field grew less and less. I could see the frustration in his eyes, the way he clenched his jaw when he came home after being benched. He was still respected, still loved by fans, but he knew he was being phased out. And here I was, carrying another man's child. I tried to bury the guilt, to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, the baby could be Mark's. But every time I looked in the mirror, I knew I was lying to myself. The breaking point came one evening when I went to watch a match. Mark was on the bench that day, and Anderson was playing. He looked powerful, confident, everything a man in his prime should be. After the game, Mark asked me to wait while he finished up with the team. I stayed nearby, and that's when Anderson caught my eye. "Come with me for a minute," he whispered, his hand brushing against mine. I should have said no. God, I should have walked away. But instead, I followed him. He led me into one of the dressing rooms, closed the door, and pressed me against the wall. His lips found mine instantly, and despite the danger, I kissed him back. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Mark calling. I ignored it, lost in the heat of the moment. But then the phone rang again. The sound echoed in the small room, and I froze. Before I could even react, the door swung open. Mark stood there. His eyes moved from me to Anderson, and in that instant, the truth was laid bare. I had never seen him look like that, shocked, devastated, and furious all at once. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his voice trembling with rage. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Anderson stepped forward, trying to shield me. "She deserves better than you, Mark," he spat. "You're too busy with your career to even notice her. You couldn't keep your wife happy." That was it. Mark lunged at him, fists flying. The two men collided, shouting, shoving, punches landing with sickening thuds. I screamed, begging them to stop, but they were too far gone. Within minutes, security rushed in, followed by the police. Both men were dragged out, bloodied and furious. The humiliation was unbearable. Cameras had already gathered, fans were outside, and whispers started spreading instantly. By the end of the night, the story was everywhere. Mark, the veteran player, caught fighting with his own teammate. The next morning, Mark came home. His face was bruised, his hands bandaged, but his eyes were colder than I'd ever seen. He didn't scream, didn't break things, didn't call me names. He just sat down across from me at the kitchen table and asked in a steady voice, "How long has this been going on?" I broke. Tears spilled down my face as I whispered, "About 5 months." He nodded slowly, like he had expected it. "And this baby you're carrying," his voice cracked. "Is it mine?" I shook my head, unable to meet his eyes. "It's yours," I lied, desperate to cling to something, anything. But deep down, I knew it wasn't true. I knew there was a strong chance it was Anderson's. Mark's career crumbled almost overnight. The board suspended him after the fight, and soon after, he was quietly pushed out of the team. Anderson, on the other hand, continued to rise. He was painted as the victim, the young star unfairly attacked by a jealous senior. And despite everything, despite the wreckage of our marriage, I still found myself meeting Anderson in secret. The pull was too strong, the addiction too deep. Even when I tried to focus on my children, on Mark, on the family we still had, I kept slipping back to Anderson. Then the baby was born. A beautiful little boy with features I couldn't deny. Mark held him, kissed his forehead, and for a moment, I thought maybe he believed me. Maybe he wanted to. But something in his eyes told me otherwise. A few weeks later, I learned the truth. Mark had secretly taken a DNA test. And when the results came back, his worst fear, and my worst nightmare, was confirmed. The baby wasn't his. The next morning, he packed his bags. He didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't even cry. He just handed me a divorce paper and said, "I can't do this anymore." My world collapsed around me. When Mark handed me the divorce papers, it felt like the ground beneath me cracked wide open. I cried, begged, pleaded for him to give me another chance, but he didn't budge. His silence was scarier than any shouting could have been. He looked at me like I was already gone, like the woman he once loved no longer existed. And in many ways, he was right. For a while, I tried to convince myself that I still had something left, that Anderson was my future, that the passion we shared was worth the destruction I had caused. He promised me the world. He told me we'd build a life together, start fresh, raise the baby as our own. He made it sound so easy, so perfect, like I could erase the mess of my past and rewrite my story. So I did the unthinkable. I left my 2 children with Mark. My babies, the ones I had rocked to sleep, kissed goodnight, held close when they were scared. I told myself they'd be better off with him, that he was the more stable parent, that my presence would only confuse them. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was running from guilt, from shame, from the wreckage of the life I had destroyed. I married Anderson. The wedding wasn't glamorous. No big celebrations, no family gathered to bless us. Just a quiet ceremony, barely acknowledged by anyone who knew us. I wore a simple dress, smiled for the pictures, and tried to convince myself that this was love, that this was the beginning of something better. The first year with Anderson was tolerable. He was still in the team then, still riding the high of his career. Money flowed, fans cheered his name, and I told myself I had chosen right. But cracks started showing faster than I expected. Anderson wasn't the same man I had fallen for in those stolen moments. Without the thrill of secrecy, he was just ordinary. He didn't have Mark's patience, his sense of responsibility, or his steady presence. He was quick to anger, careless with money, and dismissive when I tried to talk about my feelings. By the second year, his career started slipping. Younger players rose, his form declined, and soon enough, the team dropped him. Overnight, he went from a celebrated star to a forgotten name. The media barely mentioned him, and when they did, it was usually in the context of wasted potential. He took a job at a corporate office, something far beneath the lifestyle he once flaunted. The paychecks were small compared to what he used to earn, and bitterness grew inside him. The man who once made me feel alive now spent his days sulking, drinking, and blaming everyone else for his downfall. Meanwhile, I heard about Mark. Against all odds, he was called back into the team. Maybe it was his discipline, maybe his reputation, maybe just fate, but he returned stronger. And when he played, people remembered why they loved him in the first place. Crowds cheered his name again. I would see his pictures in the paper, smiling, confident, back in the game. He looked younger somehow, lighter, like a man who had shed all the baggage that once weighed him down. And then came the news that broke me in ways I hadn't expected. Mark had found someone new. She was a national tennis player, beautiful, athletic, successful in her own right. They looked radiant together, the kind of couple that turned heads. Interviews called them a power duo. Articles praised how well they fit, and fans adored their love story. I told myself I didn't care, but every time I saw their pictures, a hollow ache spread in my chest. He was happy, truly happy, and not with me. I, on the other hand, was stuck in a suffocating life. A small house, bills piling up, a husband who resented me, and the child we had together. I was no longer the glamorous wife of a star athlete. I was just a woman who had gambled everything on passion and lost. Sometimes, when I was alone, I thought about my children, the ones I had left behind. They were growing without me, probably calling someone else mom in their hearts. Did they hate me? Did they even remember me as I once was? Every memory of their laughter, their hugs, their little hands clinging to mine, it haunted me. And the worst part? I knew Mark had given them the stability and love I could not. They were thriving, while I was rotting in regret. Anderson wasn't cruel, but he wasn't loving either. He was distant, cold, more like a roommate than a husband. Our conversations revolved around money, responsibilities, and his endless bitterness. The man who once whispered that I was the most beautiful woman in the world now barely noticed me. I would catch glimpses of myself in the mirror. Tired eyes, lines forming on my face, shoulders heavy with regret. I had once been the wife of a national hero, the mother of 2 beautiful kids. Now I was just the wife of a failed cricketer working a desk job, a forgotten woman living in the shadow of her own choices. Mark had moved on. He had rebuilt his life, found love again, and carved out a new chapter filled with joy. And me? I was stuck in the ruins of the life I destroyed, clinging to a man who could never give me back what I had lost. I traded everything for passion, and in the end, all I got was emptiness. And sometimes I wonder if my son will hate me when he learns the truth. That's the price of the choices I made. Because in this story, I am not the winner. I am the woman who lost it all.